Well, shalom to all of you, the 12 tribes scattered abroad on all four corners of the world. I pray that you all are blessed, and I pray that from wherever you're watching, you and your families are covered by the blood of Messiah as we're reaching Passover. And I hope all of you are making, your preparations, not just for Passover, but the new year coming ahead, the Hebrew year that starts in about a couple of weeks or so. And so I pray all of you across the world having a blessed time and start making those preparations. And I just wanted to thank all of you that are here tonight, here live. It's really been a blessing to get to know you, Panaim, and getting to know where you're from, and some of your testimonies have been really wonderful to listen to and edifying. And for those who want to join us live, please do so. You can sign up at tourtothetribes.com/connect and sign up, and you'll get weekly invites by which every week we gather here at 8:30 Eastern time here every Friday. So if y'all want to join us live, great. We'd love to have you. Right now, we're actually in the series of dovetailing, and Brandon and myself have been doing this series, that is based on basically what comes from the book of the covenant, and it's then seen through the book of the law so we can live it out in the new covenant. Okay, so this is why the Torah is there for our building up of a righteous person, and we can only do that if we have the full counsel of the word, and we can do it so by dovetailing the covenant into a more extensive explanation through the book of the law. So anyway, today, Brandon will be, this is actually going to be divided into two parts, but this one particular theme of the dovetailing, which has to do with the testimony of Yahusha. So Brandon is going to go ahead and give us the, some essence behind what Yahusha meant. Who do you say I am? And he's going to go deeper into the verses that qualifies those who will persevere at the end, those who have the testimony of Yahusha, and also keep his commandments according to Revelation 12:17 and 14:12. And also, what compelled the the disciples to during Yahusha and post Yahusha's resurrection to go out there and preach the good news against all the calamities and all the persecution that was going on at the time. So something had to basically affect them, their inner spirit, to do that. So so he's going to go ahead and go into a wonderful study regarding this, and it's going to hopefully help us learn how to walk it out by his strength and not our own, as he calls us out to reach the nations. All right, so well, I hope everyone is blessed and edified by this wonderful teaching. And all right, Brandon, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much, Jose, and shalom to the 12 tribes scattered abroad, and Shabbat shalom to those who are already enjoying their Shabbat. We will be joining you shortly. So as Brother Jose said, which I'm going to just give a quick recap of the parts that we've already covered. So if you haven't seen those parts 1 through 5 yet, you can at least get a brief synopsis of what we're talking about. But in the part 1, we went over the introduction of what dovetailing is. I'm not going to get into that, but we talked about the 5 bullet points that sum up how to live out, or what it means to live out the Melchizedek priesthood lifestyle that we're called to do. And that's number 1, keeping the Sabbath. Number 2, obeying the commandments, the 10 words as they're so called. Number 3, observing the feasts of Yahweh. Number 4, following the dietary requirements like we discussed last week. And number 5, what we're going to be talking about tonight, is possessing the testimony or witness of Yahusha. Okay, so that's what we're going to be talking about tonight in part 6, which the reason why it's part 6 is because with the feasts, we broke that up into the summer feast, or what people may say is the spring feast, and the fall or winter feast. So we did 2 separate teachings for that. All right, but tonight we're talking about the witness or the testimony of Yahusha, the patience of the saints. So tonight we're going to be talking about the not so popular subject of, you guessed it, martyrdom. All right, so let's get started, and I pray that this will be edifying and uplifting and encouraging to those who hear it. All right, so our 2 texts that our brother Jose already mentioned are Revelation 12:17 and Revelation 14 verse 12 as well, and some others, Revelation 6:9, some others sprinkled throughout as well. I have a lot of scripture for you tonight. I really don't have sermon notes. What I have is a bunch of scriptures and some stories out of a book. This is from, I think it's via the Voice of the Martyrs, I want to say. I bought this like back in, like, I don't even know, like 2000. Well, no, I got saved in 2002. So I probably bought this in like 2002, 2003 or something like that. But it's a book called Jesus Freaks. Okay. And it's a story about people who gave their life for the witness which they held of who they called, they might have referred to him as Jesus or Yahusha or Yeshua or one of the other variants, who knows, but they gave their life for their Messiah for the sake of knowing him. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And we're going to read some of those stories because they're very, very intense and very, very powerful. All right. So Revelation 12:17, part B, just to kind of bring you up to speed on the context of what we're talking about. So obviously Revelation 12 is talking about the war in heaven and the war on earth, right? And so just starting here in Revelation 12:14, and the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle to fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time, times, and half a time, or 1260 days, or 3.5 years, or 42 months from the presence of the serpent. And right now, what is the theme been? Since February, March 2020, they're all in this together. And you've heard me address this before, but they're all in this together. And Yahweh showed me that they're talking. There's a secret message within that phrase, and there's a reason why it's in all caps. It's not that they're all in this together, but they're all in this to get her. Who's her? Her is the bride. Who's Yahusha's bride? Yasharel, or Yisrael, the 12 tribes scattered abroad. Okay, that's what they're all in this to get. And I've touched on before how through the testing they were searching and seeking for the seed of Abraham, those who are entitled to the inheritance of the earth, because we know that the meek inherit the earth, right? So that's who her is. And it says, and out of his mouth the serpent spewed, or the dragon spewed water like a river after the woman, and caused her to be swept away by the river. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the river which the dragon had spewed out of its mouth. And the dragon was enraged with the woman. Now, why is the dragon enraged with the woman? Because they're all in this to get her, but Yahusha won't let them have her. So he's enraged with the woman, the bride, Yasharel, and he went to fight with the remnant of her seed, those guarding the commands of Elohim, which we've already talked about in previous weeks, and possessing the testimony or witness of Yahusha HaMashiach. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So it's the twofold. It's not just what Christianity has of possessing the witness of Yahusha or of Jesus, and knowing who he is and believing in him and following him. And it's not just what Torah folks do, those in Judaism do, where they just guard the commands of Elohim, but it's both. We have to have the marriage or the dovetailing of both, guarding the commands of Elohim and possessing the witness or testimony of Yahusha. All right. So let's kind of break this down for a second. So our text here, Revelation 12:17, those guarding the commands of Elohim and possessing the witness of Yahusha. Well, what does it mean to possess the witness of something? Well, let's look at the word possess. To have and to hold as property, to own, right? To have and to hold, what does that make you think of? Well, it makes me think of the marriage vow, right? To have and to hold from this day forth, as long as you both shall live, right? I do that, right? To have is an attribute, knowledge or skill, right? Now, this word right here, Strong's G 3143 is witness. So this word is marturia, from 3144, which is down below. Evidence given judicially or generally, a record, a report, a testimony, witness. What have you seen and heard, right? How many times do you hear that? You know, what I've seen and heard, that's what it's about, right? It comes from, the root comes from martus, of uncertain affinity, a witness, literally as in judicially, or figuratively as in generally, by analogy, a martyr, record, witness. This is where the word martyr comes from, is witness, okay? And this is why, so I was going to take this in a different direction, but then I felt God was leading me in this direction, and that's why we're splitting it into two parts, because I was going to talk about the witness of, the testimony of Yahusha, and going into who do you say that I am, and talking about, different declarations that he declared of who he declared himself to be. But then he showed me that I need to take it in this direction first. And then we're going to talk about what compelled them next week by the encounter that they had with Yahusha, what compelled them to do what they did, which is to preach the gospel to the ends of the earth the way that they did, in the area that they went, and die the deaths that they died, and go through the torture that they went through, right? So a witness, this is from Webster's, I believe it's Webster's dictionary. So witness, an attestation of a fact or event, a testimony. Now, we all have a testimony. We all have a moment in time where, for me, I can tell you it was March 22nd, 2002, where I can attest to the fact that I met our Savior. Not physically, but I met him. He came into my heart. He regenerated me, made me a new creation. And the old Brandon died that day, or that evening, rather. It was a Friday evening. And a new Brandon was born. I can attest to that fact. I'm a witness because I've seen and I've heard what he's done in and throughout my life. One that gives evidence, specifically one who testifies in a cause or before a judicial tribunal. One asked to be present at a transaction, right? A witness of a transaction. One who has personal knowledge of something. Do you have personal knowledge? We're not talking about, well, I have the faith of my mom, my faith of my dad. I'm on the coattails of faith of someone else. No. In the days that we're living in, that just won't do. And I'm talking to those who are in the room with us now in Zoom, and I'm talking to everyone who might hear this in the future. You can't go into the kingdom, into the days that we're in, and the days coming on the curtails of faith, the faith of the curtails of someone else. It just won't do. You have to have a personal knowledge of Yahusha, of our Messiah. Something serving as evidence or proof, public affirmation by word or example, usually religious faith or conviction. That's what we're talking about, right? So the next text, Revelation 12:17 in the New King James. And the dragon was enraged with the woman and went to make war with the rest of her offspring who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus. This is out of the New King James. The first one was out of the ISR 1998. So what's testimony? So testimony is a solemn declaration usually made orally by a witness under oath, like the Leviticus 5 oath that Yahusha was under, in response to interrogation by a lawyer or authorized public official. First-hand authentication of a fact, evidence, an outward sign. What would an outward sign be? The Brandon that I saw before he went on that trip to Denver, Colorado, was different than the Brandon that my mom saw when I got back from Colorado, right? There's an outward sign. There's something different about that person, okay? I'm just using myself as an example, but an open acknowledgement, a public profession of a religious experience. Even the Ark of the Testimony, right? The tablets inscribed with, they're calling it the Mosaic Law, but we know it was the 10 words. It was the Book of the Covenant. The Ark containing the tablets, the Ark of Testimony, a divine decree attested in the Scriptures, right? So let's move on to the next one. Back to our first text, Revelation 14:12. Here is the endurance of the saints, or of the set apart ones. Here are those guarding the commands of Elohim and the belief or testimony of Yahusha. Well, what does it mean to guard? Well, the Greek word G5083, tereo, comes from teros, a watch, perhaps akin to G2334, to guard. We guard it from loss. We guard it from injury. We keep an eye on it, okay? We prevent it from escaping. We hold fast to it, okay? Which we're going to talk about that in a second. But we keep it. We preserve it. We watch over it. Okay, it's not something passively. It's not just, oh, I know who Yahusha is. I know that he died for me, but it's active. Okay, just like our faith, it's active. There's works involved. We can't just I'll tell you an analogy real quick. Okay, so we just finished building a chicken coop, and you don't just build a chicken coop half-heartedly, because you want to protect the birds that you put in there, because that's going to be what you're getting your eggs from, your livelihood from, your meat from, all that kind of stuff, right? So you want to protect it, you want to guard it, you want to keep it from any outside force coming in there, any predator coming in there. So what do? You keep an eye on it. You don't just button it up one time and put the chicken wire over it, the best that you could, the smallest gap that you could to keep the animals out, but you regularly check on it to make sure that there's no chinks in your armor, right? So we have to guard it. We have to hold fast to it. We can't let it go. If we let it go, the enemy can come in, and that's where sin comes in, and possibly that's what causes us to buy into the strong delusion, and then we find ourselves taking the mark of the beast, right? So we have to hold fast. It's living, it's breathing, it's active. Belief. What is belief? It's a state of mind, a state or habit of mind in which trust or confidence is placed in some person or thing. Now, we know it's not just some person or thing, but it's the King of Kings and the Master of Masters. That's who my trust, that's who my confidence is in, right? Faith. What is faith? Faith is belief and trust and loyalty to Yahweh, belief in the traditional doctrines of religion. I like B1, a firm belief in something for which there is no proof, clinging to the faith that, and the example is clinging to the faith that her missing son would one day return. Line 2, complete trust. right? Hebrews 11:6 says, without faith, without emunah in the Hebrew, it's impossible to please him. For we have to believe that he is, meaning that he exists, and that he's a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. Read Hebrews 11. It's the faith chapter, right? Faith. Something is believed, especially strong conviction, especially a system of religious beliefs. Now I'm just putting some stuff up for you to look at, but I did find this interesting, and I'm going to check this out later, but this is just a thumbnail from the fifth seal. But these are all references to altars here. You have the word of Yahweh and testimony, which they held fast to, right? Revelation 1:2, 1:9, Revelation 6:9, 11:7, 12:11, 12:17, 19:10, and 20, verse 4, Matthew 10:18 through 39, Luke 21, 12 through 19, and they're given a white robe. Revelation 6:11, 7:9, 7:13 through 14, 19:8, 19:14, and 22 rather, 14, right? Judge, avenge our blood, right? The number of our brothers completed. Anyway, you can look at that later. So how does this apply to us today? Because I believe that we should, instead of asserting ourselves and thinking like, oh, I'll be spared and I won't have to face martyrdom, I'd rather prepare you for martyrdom and you be spared from martyrdom than the other way around, if that makes sense, right? And that's where that whole pre-tribulation rapture fails. And I'm not going to go into that right now because it's a completely different teaching, okay? But the fifth seal says this, Revelation 6:9, and when he, and I put in parentheses Yahusha, because I want you to understand that it's Yahusha holding that scroll and breaking those 7 seals, and see Revelation 5:5 through 8 for proof that it is him. Open the 5th seal. I saw under the altar of heaven, those souls or beings of those having been slain for the word of Elohim and for the witness which they held, or which they kept, or which they guarded. Okay? So they were slain for the witness. They were martyrs. Okay? And here's in the New King James here, when he opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. In verse 10, they cried with a loud voice, saying, oh, how long, O Master, set apart and true, until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell upon the earth. Revelation 2:10, do not fear any of those things which you are about to suffer. Indeed, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested. And you will have tribulation 10 days. Be faithful unto death, or until death, and I will give you the crown of life. And isn't that what we are all striving for, is that crown, to be told, well done, my good and faithful servant. Now, according to the late researcher, David B. Barrett, as of 2014, there was an estimated 70 million believers who have been martyred, meaning that they were killed for their witness or testimony of Yahusha or Jesus. Because we know that, and I love what Matthew says about it, is each generation is responsible or held accountable for the information which they have available. And we know that 150 years ago, there was martyrdom going on. Of course, there's been martyrdom going on ever since, ever since he went into the grave and was resurrected, and the disciples went out, which we're going to talk about. But, what do we say about those who, died and it wasn't the name that we call them, right? I would say that they've earned they've finished the race. They've earned their crown that they're entitled to, right? So don't get hung up on the name thing is what I'm saying, is because he's going to come back and he's going to have a name that nobody knows except himself. Since the time he walked the earth, though, 70 million estimated believers have been martyred, killed for the witness or testimony which they held. Okay, the first martyr was Stephen. Stephen. This is in obviously his martyrdom took place circa 34 CE, or the Common Era, in Jerusalem. And I'm going to start read a quick excerpt here. It says, across the courtroom, the young man on trial continued preaching. The jury fidgeted nervously as he told of their religious heritage and forefathers. What did Abraham and Moses have to do with Yahusha? Another young man in the audience, about the same age as the defendant, seemed not to be listening. His mind was already made up on the matter of this Yahusha follower. The crowd of Jewish leaders, however, grew more agitated at every word for the young defendant. Suddenly, the preacher turned to the audience. You stubborn and hard-headed people, you're always fighting against the Holy Spirit, just like your ancestors did. They killed the prophets who told about the coming of the righteous one. And now you have turned against him and killed him. You have received the law of Yahweh, but you have not kept it. When the crowd heard this, they were even more furious, but the defendant ignored their growing anger. His face glowed like that of an angel, and he stopped talking and pointed to the ceiling or the sky. Look, I see heaven open and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of Yahweh. This was too much. Yelling at the top of their voices, they all rushed at him. They dragged him out of the city to stone him. He continued preaching all the way. The young man who had been in the audience, one, Saul of Tarsus, followed after them. He stood at a short distance away from the defendant, looking steadily at the sky as the mob grew larger. The cries grew more heated now. A man handed Saul his coat, then stooped to pick up a stone as though waiting for a signal from Saul. Saul lowered his gaze, then looked directly into the man's eyes and nodded. It was the time to silence the young preacher. Stephen, the defendant, continued despite the crowd's jeers, because the man he was telling them about was so important to him. Man is capitalized, of course, the Son of Man. He couldn't stop talking about him. Several more men had now removed their coats and handed them to Saul and began gathering rocks, many of them so large they had to lift them with two hands. This blasphemer must be dealt with. He speaks against Moses. We don't want to hear about your Yahusha anymore. A rock sailed past Stephen's head. He stopped speaking long enough to duck, dazed for a moment, then stood to continue. The second rock caught him near his temple, and he fell to his knees. Another hit his shoulder. Then there were too many to count. No more Yahusha talk. Let this be a lesson to all you who proclaim this Yahusha. Another stone found its mark, then another. He couldn't open his eyes for the sting of the blood. His clothes were torn by the blows, and the blood dripped freely from the tatters. He began to pray, Master Yahusha, receive my spirit. Then he scanned the crowd until the eyes locked of those young men who held the bundle of coats. And Master, he continued, do not hold this sin against them. When he said these words, Stephen died. Slowly, men gathered their coats from young Saul, who was soon alone with the body of the young preacher. Saul had come to Jerusalem to help silence this growing craze about Yahusha of Nazareth. Despite his hatred, he could not shake the young man's words, how fearlessly he had faced death. He stood staring at the body of the first martyr for this Yahusha. The glow he had so angered Saul was still on the young man's face. He had seen it as the smug pride of a heretic, but could it have been something else? He quenched the thought and turned away, more determined than ever to crush this Yahusha movement. And we know the story of Saul. He later, in Acts chapter 9, 2 chapters later, he gets knocked off his high horse, right? So let's talk about how did the apostles die, right? And how do we overcome? Revelation 12:11 tells us they overcame them by the blood of the Lamb, by the word of their testimony, and they did not love their life even when faced with death. So the apostles finished the race. Saul of Tarsus, 35 AD. Ananias, the voice was clear. Yes, Master, Ananias answered. Go over to Straight Street to the house of Judas. When you arrive, ask for a man from Tarsus. His name is Saul. He just had a vision in which he saw a man named Ananias come and lay hands on him so he could see again. But Master, Ananias exclaimed, everybody's been talking about this man and the terrible things which he's done to believers in Jerusalem. And he's shown up here in Damascus with papers from the chief priests authorizing him to arrest every believer in town. But Yahusha said, go, I've picked Saul as my personal representative to take my message to the nations, the Gentiles, to kings, and to the people of Israel. I'm about to show him what he must suffer for my name. And Ananias obeyed Yahusha and found Saul, and he laid his hands on him and said, Brother Saul, the Master Yahusha, whom you saw on your way here, sent me so you could see again and be filled with the Holy Spirit. Instantly, something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, and he could see again. He got up and he was baptized, and then sat down and ate a hearty meal. Now, several times Paul was caught and released and caught and released, right? But his last here is when he reaches Rome. When he reaches Rome, Paul survived all of these and finally reached Rome around 55 AD. There he was put under house arrest until his trial before Caesar. Most ancient writers agree that although nearly all of his friends left him, he defended himself before Caesar so cleverly that he was set free for a time. After more missionary journeys, he was again arrested. By this time, being a follower of Yahusha carried the death penalty. As Paul's execution drew near, Yahuwah prepared his heart. He wrote his spiritual son, Timothy, now the time has come for me to die. My life is poured out like a drink offering being poured out on the altar. I have fought well, I have finished the race, and I have been faithful. So a crown will be given to me for pleasing the Master. Finally, Paul was sentenced to death. Because he was a Roman citizen, he was not tortured like so many other believers during Nero's reign, but was beheaded outside the city. He was approximately 64 years old. Matthias, he was the one who replaced the traitor Judas Iscariot. He was stoned and beheaded in Jerusalem. Simon the Zealot, he was tortured and crucified in Syria. Simon the Zealot was also known as Simon the Canaanite. He preached the gospel in Egypt, North Africa, Mauritania, an island in the Indian Ocean, and the islands of Great Britain. Some historians say he was crucified in Great Britain in 70 AD. Other historians say Simon left Great Britain and went to Persia, where he found Jude. Together, they steadfastly continued teaching and preaching until Jude's death in 68 AD, later that same year. Simon was painfully tortured and crucified by a governor in Syria. Jude, the brother of James. Jude, also known as Thaddeus Labius, wrote the book of Jude. He was the younger brother of Yahusha and James the Just. He traveled in Mesopotamia, Syria, Arabia, Persia, present-day Iran, reaching as far as Edema. There he preached boldly against worshiping idols and making heathen sacrifices. When the pagan priests saw that they were losing followers and money because of Jude's teaching, they attacked him with sticks and clubs, beating him to death, and he died in 68 CE. James, the son of Alphaeus, he was thrown off the pinnacle of the temple in Jerusalem, preaching from the rooftop, it says. Jerusalem Israel, 63 AD. James looked down from where he stood, balanced carefully at the highest point of the temple. Far below, he could see the streets were filled with people. It was Passover, and Jews from all over the known world had come to the holy city. A hand grabbed his arm, pulling him off balance. Get on with it, a voice threatened behind him. A safe distance from the dangerous ledge stood the chief priests, scribes, and Pharisees. Deny that Yahusha of Nazareth is the Messiah. Before all these people, deny that Yahusha was the son of Elohim and that he was resurrected from the dead, they demanded. James the Just was one of Yahusha's younger brothers, as was Jude. It appears that James was skeptical of Yahusha's claims during his ministry, as was the rest of Yahusha's family, until he saw Yahusha alive again after his crucifixion and resurrection. James never backed away from following Yahusha after that. James risked another glance at the street below. Many of the people down there knew him. For 30 years, he had been the bishop of the assembly at Jerusalem. During that time, he wrote the book of the Bible, the Epistle of James. And he had openly preached Yahusha as the Messiah and the resurrected son of Elohim on almost every street corner. How could he deny what he had seen with his own eyes and what he had heard with his own ears and touched with his own hands, his risen master? Through his preaching, his prayers, and his example, James converted many people to Messiah. He was on his bare knees so often worshiping Yahweh, praying for forgiveness for the sins of the people, that his knees became numb and calloused like the knees of a camel, and that earned him the nickname James the Just. He was respected by everyone, even those who opposed what he taught and believed. Feeling threatened by a rapid growth of the assembly, the chief priests, scribes, and Pharisees came up with a plan. They would force this well-known assembly leader to deny his faith before the multitude, but James refused to cooperate. From his place at the top of the temple, he preached with more boldness than ever. Every person in the crowd below looked up as he proclaimed, Yahusha is the promised Messiah, sitting at the right hand of Elohim, and he shall come again in the clouds of heaven to judge the quick or the living and the dead. When the crowd below saw his courage and heard the boldness, his bold words, they loudly praised Yahweh and magnified the name of Yahusha. Enraged, 2 or 3 of the religious leaders jumped forward and pushed James off the temple roof. Miraculously, James was not killed by the fall, only his legs were broken. Then the priests, scribes, and Pharisees said, let's stone the just man, James. They picked up rocks to stone him to death. James, kneeling on his broken legs, prayed, Master, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. One of the priests, when he heard James praying, begged the others to stop, saying, what are we doing? The just is praying for us. Stop stoning, stop stoning. While he was shouting this, another man ran up with a big, heavy stick in his hand and struck James in the head. James died instantly from the blow, still in prayer. Still in prayer. Let's look at Matthew, the tax collector. Remember Matthew, the tax collector? He quit his job immediately as a tax collector and followed Yahusha. While still in Jerusalem, Matthew wrote the gospel to the Yahudim, the Jews, in Hebrew. Later, at the dividing of the countries among the disciples, Matthew drew Ethiopia. There he accomplished much with teaching as well as with miracles. Ethiopia's king, Agilupus, favored the believers, but when he died, an unbelieving heathen took the throne. King Hyrcanus had Matthew arrested, and he stood teaching. While he stood teaching in his assembly, he was dragged outside and nailed to the ground with short spears and beheaded. He died in 66 of the Common Era. Thomas, remember Thomas, known as Doubting Thomas? I will not believe unless I see I put my finger through his hands and my hand in his side. Thomas, Jerusalem, Israel, 34 of the Common Era. Thomas knocked on the door of the upper room with the secret knock. It was immediately open. He stepped inside and shut the door behind him. He was suddenly surrounded by friends who were all talking all at once. It was impossible to understand any of them. Thomas, Thomas, what Mary Magdalene said was true. He's alive. He's alive. Thomas, we've seen him. Thomas waved his hand. Shh. I can't listen to you all at once. Peter, what has happened? Thomas, we saw Yahusha. He stood right here in this room with us. He talked to us. Thomas frowned. Peter, we've all been under a lot of stress. We haven't really slept since Yahusha died. You must be imagining things. All of us imagining the same thing at the same time. I tell you, we saw him. He walked through the locked door. He walked through the locked door, Thomas asked. Everyone nodded. That explains it. It was a ghost. You didn't see Yahusha, you saw a ghost. Thomas, we know we saw the Master. He showed us the wounds in his hands and in his side. Our hearts could feel it was really him. Mary spoke up. Oh, Thomas, if you would have been here, you would know it was him. Thomas shook his head. Did any of you touch him? No. Then you can't know whether or not it was just a ghost. Believe what you want, but unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe it. A week later, Thomas was gathered with the rest of the disciples in the house with the doors locked. Suddenly, Yahusha came and stood among them and said, peace to you. Yahusha focused his attention on Thomas. Take your finger, examine my hands. Take your hand and stick it in my side. Don't be unbelieving, but believe. Thomas fell to his knees. He didn't have to touch the wounds. He knew it was Yahusha. He cried out, my master, my Elohim. Yahusha smiled. So you believe because you have seen with your own eyes. Good, but better blessings are in store for those who believe without seeing. Thomas never doubted Yahusha again. Later, when the disciples traveled throughout the known world to preach the gospel, Thomas was chosen to go to India and North Africa. Although he dreaded living among these savage tribes, Yahweh strengthened him. He was able to convert many in these countries. Around 70 AD, he went to Kalamina, India, where the people worshiped an image of the sun. Through the power of Yahweh, Thomas destroyed the image and put a stop to their idolatry. The sun god's priests were furious. They accused him before their king, who sentenced him to be tortured with red-hot metal plates, then thrown into a glowing furnace. To the amazement of all, the fire did not hurt Thomas. He was still alive in the midst of the fire. When the priests saw this, they were so angry, they threw spears and javelins into the furnace at him, and one of the spears pierced his side, and he fell there, dead. Bartholomew, Nathaniel, remember Nathaniel from John chapter 8, who Yahusha saw under the tree? I won't bow down, it says. Bartholomew, Armenia, 70 AD. You are unsettling the worship of our gods, and not only that, you have perverted my own brother, the king of Armenia shouted at Bartholomew. But Bartholomew did not back down, my type of guy. One of the original 12 disciples, he had boldly preached Yahushua HaMashiach for 37 years. Starting in the heathen cities throughout what is now Turkey, he traveled to India. Here, after he learned the language, he translated the Gospel of Matthew and taught the Indians in their native tongue. Later, he preached in 12 different cities in the country of Armenia, located in present-day country of Turkey and Iran. Many people turned from the idolatry to worship Yahusha, including the king of Armenians' brother and his family. Nathanael boldly answered the king, saying, I have preached the true worship of Elohim throughout your country. I have not perverted your brother and his family, but rather I have converted them to the truth. King Astyages threatened Bartholomew, unless you stop preaching Messiah and make sacrifices to the god of Ashtaroth, you will be put to death. You can be sure of this, King Astyages, I will never sacrifice to your idol. I would rather seal my testimony with my blood than to do the smallest act against my faith or conscience. Upon hearing this, the king ordered, I want this man to suffer severe torture. First, beat him with rods. After that, suspend him upside down on a cross and skin him alive. Following the king's command, Nathanael was beaten, crucified, and flayed. Despite all this, he was still conscious and continued to exhort the people to believe in Yahusha. and worship the one true Elohim. Finally, to prevent him from saying anything else, the king's men took an axe and cut off his head. Bartholomew was united with Yahusha, his master. John, the beloved. John the beloved. The indestructible John. John the Apostle. The Roman Empire, 95 CE, the Common Era. This is John, the apostle of Yahusha HaMashiach. The herald proclaimed 3 times. Hearing this, the crowd in the stadium cheered wildly. They gathered to see how the last of the 12 apostles who walked the earth with Yahusha would meet death. The Roman emperor stared at the old man. So you are John, the apostle of love, he sneered. Are you ready to die? Before John could answer, an officer approached the emperor and whispered in his ear, perhaps you have heard the saying among the believers that this John will not die until their Elohim, Yahusha, returns. Yes, I have heard. In fact, everyone in Rome has heard it, replied the emperor. These believers are a stubborn and superstitious lot. I will show them. This man will die today. How shall we kill him? The officer asked. Lions do not always kill the Christians. There have been times that fire did not burn their bodies. Cutting off their heads is too noble an end for such as these. That is reserved for Roman citizens, said the emperor. The chief executioner spoke up. What about throwing him in a vat of boiling oil? No one could survive that. The emperor nodded in his agreement. Prepare the oil. As men rushed to fulfill his order, the herald proclaimed 3 times, John the Apostle will be boiled in oil. The crowd cheered with their approval. They would witness the death of John the Beloved. John, one of Yahusha's closest friends, was one of the 3 men Yahusha invited into his inner circle. These 3, Peter, James, and John, witnessed the miracles that the other 9 did not. They were the only ones who saw Yahusha in all of his majesty on the mountaintop, his face shining like the sun and his clothes glowing white as light in Matthew 17. John was so full of zeal in his intensity that Yahusha nicknamed him and his brother sons of thunder. The night Yahusha was arrested, John followed the soldiers, entered the priest's high priest's courtyard, and watched to see what would happen to his master. Of all the disciples, only John stood boldly with the women at the foot of the tree the day that Yahusha was crucified. The Roman emperor snarled at the apostle, if your Yahusha is really Elohim, then ask him to save you. Then turning to the executioner, he commanded, take him away. As John waited for the fire to be lit, the oil to boil, he reflected back on the other times he had been persecuted for this gospel. When the paralyzed man at the temple gate was miraculously healed in Acts chapter 3, he and Peter were arrested and imprisoned overnight. The next day, they were threatened by the authorities and told never to preach again in the name of Yahusha. But all this did was inspire the disciples to pray for more boldness and more miraculous signs and wonders through the name of Yahusha. A short time later, John was jailed with several other apostles, and the time they were released by an angel who told them, go and preach in the temple, and they immediately did. For this, they were beaten by the religious leaders who again commanded them, do not preach in the name of Yahusha. But the apostles, deciding it was better to obey Yahweh than man, Acts chapter 5, verse 32, kept on preaching. The master continued to confirm the word with signs and wonders. Since then, John had seen the master deliver him time and time again. He survived the persecutions of Nero, which had ended the lives of many of those who remained of the original 12 disciples. The gruff voice of the guard brought back John to the present. Get up, believer, the oil's ready. The crowd rose to their feet, clapping and shouting as the prisoner was lowered into boiling oil. John raised his hands up towards heaven, praying to Yahweh. Minutes passed. John continued to pray. The cheering of the crowd faded into awed silence. They too had heard it. It said that this man would never die. Then the whispering started. The apostle is not harmed. It's a miracle. His Elohim has protected him. Yahusha has protected this apostle. The emperor stared at the apostle in the vat of boiling oil. Against all logic, John was still alive and still praying. The emperor's plan had backfired. Instead of destroying all the faith in Yahushua HaMashiach, he had actually helped increase it. Frustrated, he looked at the chief executioner and shrank from under his gaze. Is there no way to destroy this man? The emperor asked. But before the executioner could answer, a new cheer from the crowd drew their attention. John was no longer quietly praying. He started loudly and joyfully worshiping Yahusha and celebrating his deliverance from death. The emperor made a quick decision. Get this man out of my sight. When John was miraculously delivered from the vat of boiling oil, the emperor gave up trying to kill him. Instead, he banished John to the rocky island of Patmos for 2 years. He lived alone in exile, but the master was with him. During this time, Yahweh revealed to him the beautiful scenes and the heavenly visions which he wrote down in the very book of Revelation. When Emperor Domitian died in 99 CE of the Common Era, the Roman Senate repealed his judgments, and John was released. He was later brought back to Ephesus, where he once had been the leader of the assembly. Even here, he suffered persecution and was forced to drink poison. Yet he remained unharmed, just as Yahusha had promised. If they drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them. Mark 16, verse 18. While in Ephesus, John governed the assemblies in Asia. He read the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke and verified that they were true, the synoptic Gospels. He wrote the Gospel of John to add his perspective, as well as 3 epistles of John found in the Bible. John outlived all the other apostles by more than 30 years. He finally died in peace when he was about 101 years old. The power of love. John the Beloved, the one who laid upon Yahusha's chest. James, the son of Zebedee. You will indeed drink from my cup. Yahusha said, James and John, come with me. James and his brother John followed their mother, who knelt at Yahusha's feet. Master, will you do me a favor? Will you do a favor for me? She asked. What would you like me to do? Yahusha asked. Their mother said, grant that one of my 2 sons may sit at your right hand and the other at your left in your kingdom. You do not know what you are asking, Yahusha said. Then he turned to the 2 men. Can you drink of the cup I am going to drink? We can, James and John answered together. Yahusha said to them, you will indeed drink from my cup. Several years later, King Herod Agrippa decided to stop the spread of believing in Messiah by striking its leaders. He had James arrested and sentenced to death on the basis of one man's testimony. However, when his accusers saw James' extraordinary courage and steadfast joy when he was condemned to die, the man was deeply touched in his heart. There on the spot, the accuser made the decision for Mashiach. He boldly cried out, I want to follow Yahusha also. I'm a believer. The soldiers led James to be executed along the way. His accuser stopped the apostle and fell down at his feet. I'm so sorry for what I've done, he cried. The blood of an innocent man is on my hands. Please, please, before you die, please forgive me. James paused for a moment and then said, peace be to you, brother. And he gave him a holy kiss. Then the man said, you should not receive the crown of martyrdom alone. I will die with you. He was immediately sentenced to death, and they were both brought to the place of execution. Minutes later, the 2 were beheaded together. Simon Peter. Peter, Jerusalem, Israel, 44 CE. The believers met secretly in homes, fearing public gatherings, many being harassed and persecuted and arrested because they were followers of Yahusha of Nazareth. As they prepared for their Passover celebrations, word came that one of their leaders, James, the brother of John, had been arrested and beheaded. The believers were overwhelmed at the swiftness of the execution. Even more alarming was the public acceptance of such brutality. There was no tolerance for this new sect that proclaimed Yahusha as the Messiah. Another assembly leader was taken into custody to ensure that no one came to his rescue. 2 soldiers stood on guard within a small cell, each bound to the prisoner at the wrist. 2 additional guards were ordered to stand outside to watch the cell. Instead of being immediately executed like the first, he was held in custody until after the Passover celebration, when he was to be executed publicly. The believers gathered on behalf of their imprisoned leader and began to pray fervently, asking Yahweh to deliver him from such a fate. Word spread throughout the region, and within a matter of hours, thousands committed themselves to pray. The night before his scheduled execution, the condemned man received a visitor. An angel of Yahweh appeared to and the apostle Peter was miraculously released from prison. The others were so surprised by his quick release that when he knocked at the door, they would not let him in because they didn't believe it was him. Soon after that, Herod died, and Peter remained in Jerusalem as a leader of the assembly for some time. Fast forward to 65 AD. From the early Christian historian Hegesippus, we learn that Peter eventually traveled to Rome to minister in his old age. Nero determined to have him executed, but the disciples there heard about it and urged Peter to flee. Though resistant at first, Peter eventually gave in. But as he approached the city gate, he saw Yahusha walking in the other direction. Peter fell down to his knees and said, "Master, where are you going?" Yahusha answered, "I've come to be crucified again." Peter took this to mean that it was his time to die, just as Yahusha had prophesied him in John chapter 21, verse 19. So he returned to the city upon being captured and sentenced to be crucified. Peter announced he was not worthy to be crucified in the same position as his Savior, so he requested to die on the cross upside down. The Romans honored this request. And lastly, Andrew. Not afraid of the tree. Andrew, Peter's brother, Greece, 66 AD. Andrew boldly looked at the governor in the eye, said, "It is good for you, the judge of men, to know your judge who dwells in heaven," he said, his voice ringing in with force of truth. "After you know him, then worship him, removing from your mind false gods and blind idols." Christians all over the empire were being executed in obedience to a decree from the Roman Senate. Peter had been crucified a year earlier. Before this would end, 6 more of the original disciples, including Andrew, would be executed. One of the 12, only John, would remain on the earth. Andrew had voluntarily came to face Agius, the governor, to persuade him not to persecute the many believers Andrew had brought to the faith in the city of Patras. Andrew's words angered the king. "Are you the same Andrew who has overthrown the temple of the gods and persuades men to be superstitious of that superstitious sect which Rome has now commanded to be abolished?" Andrew answered, "The princes of the Romans do not understand the truth. The Son of Elohim, coming from heaven into the world for man's sake, has taught and declared how those idols whom you honor as gods are not gods, but rather cruel devils, enemies to the mankind. They teach the people to do things that are so offensive to Yahweh that he turns away. In serving the devil, people fall into all kinds of wickedness after they die. Nothing remains for them but their evil deeds." "Enough," the governor commanded. "Do not teach such things anymore. You will be fastened to the cross with all speed." Andrew answered, "If I were afraid of the death of the cross, I would not have preached about the majesty, honor, and glory of the cross." I'm going to say it again because it's so good. Andrew said, "If I were afraid of the death of the cross, I would not have preached about the majesty, honor, and glory of the cross." Then the governor pronounced sentence, "This man is starting a new sect, taking away the religion of the Roman gods. I hereby sentence him to death by crucifixion." As Andrew was brought toward the place of execution, he saw from afar off the cross prepared for him. Instead of the fear that might be expected, fervent love for Yahusha rose up in his heart. He cried out, "O cross, most welcome, long looked for. With a willing mind, I joyfully come to you, being the disciple of him who hung upon you." As he neared the cross, he said, "The nearer I come to the cross, the nearer I come to Yahweh. And the farther I am from the cross, the farther I remain from Yahweh." For 3 days, the apostle hung upon the cross. As long as he could move his tongue, he instructed all those who stood by, encouraging them, "Remain steadfast in the word and doctrine which you have received, instructing one another, that you may dwell with Yahweh in eternity and receive the fruit of his promises." After 3 days, the believers asked the governor to take Andrew down from the cross and release him to them. But Andrew, hearing their plans, cried out, "Oh, Master Yahusha, don't let your servant who hangs here on this tree for your name's sake be released to dwell again among men. Please receive me, O Master, O my Elohim. You I have known, you I have loved, you I cling to, you I desire to see, and in you I am what I am." Having spoken these words, he committed his spirit into the hands of the Heavenly Father. All these stories and even more are in this book. And I've had this book for, like I said, probably 20 years. And even the authors of the Gospels and epistles were put to death. Mark, known as John Mark, the author of the Gospel of Mark, he was dragged to death. Luke, the physician, the author of Luke and the book of Acts, he was hung upon, of all things, an olive tree. James, the half brother of Yahusha, was thrown off of a 100-foot wall, and it was done to him after he repeatedly refused to deny his faith in Yahusha. He survived the fall and was beaten to death with clubs. So the question is, what compelled them? What compelled these men to do these things? When Yahusha called them, he called Andrew, and you notice the order in which I did this in, right? I hope you did, because I did it in a specific order on purpose. Matthew 10 shows us the record of how the disciples were called. Verse 2, it says, "Now the names of the 12 apostles are these. First, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew his brother, James the son of Zebedee, John his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, who's Nathaniel, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James the son of Alphaeus, and Lebbaeus, whose surname was Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanite, and Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed him." These are the 12. So I went from those who were called last, including the Apostle Paul, to those who were called first. And Andrew was actually called, it mentions Andrew first before Peter, so that's why he went last. But what caused these men to, Andrew and Peter, they were fishing, and Yahusha says, "Levatharai, come, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." And at once they drop their nets and they go and follow him. And they didn't know that they would come back to their boat later on and get their boat back and still be fishermen, but be with Yahusha, right? Or James and John, the sons of thunder, the sons of Zebedee, they were fishing with their father, and not only did they leave their business of fishing, but they left their father as well. They just dropped everything, followed him. Matthew, the tax collector, Yahusha looked him dead in the eye, said, "Come, follow me." And he dropped everything at once. He left all the riches of the world behind, quit his job as a tax collector, and went and followed him. What compelled them? Was it the miracles of the healing of the sick, the opening of the blinded eye, the allowing the deaf to hear, allowing the mute to speak, the lame to walk, the multiplication of the food, or even the raising of the dead? No, it was none of these. But the Apostle Paul tells us that it was the love of Messiah that compelled them. See, they all had an intimate and personal connection with Yahusha. Because see, here's the thing. The crowds, they saw the miracles. They saw him heal the sick. They saw him open the blinded eyes. They saw him cause the deaf to hear, the mute to speak, the lame to walk, the multiplication of the food, the feeding of the 4,000 and 5,000, and even raising the dead. But they were still the crowd, and the crowds went away. But the disciples, the crowds, they followed out of convenience, but the disciples, they followed out of conviction. The love of Mashiach compels us, having judged this, that if one died for all, then all died. And he died for all, that those who should live should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them and was raised. The Apostle Paul tells us in 2 Corinthians 5:14 and 15. They all have a personal, intimate connection. He said, you did not choose me, but I chose you, in the closing chapters of the book of John. You did not choose me, but I chose you. And he called them all out. Levantavrai, come, follow me. Come, follow me. Come, follow me. And they dropped everything and they followed him. So why does this apply to us? How does this apply to us, rather? Because we have to overcome. We have to overcome. It says Revelation 12:11, and they overcame him, meaning the beast, the dragon, because of the blood of the Lamb, because we can't do anything without the blood of the Lamb. That's the first step, right? You don't have that blood on the doorpost of your heart, it's all for naught. And because of the word of their witness, their testimony, and they did not love their lives even unto death. Just like these men and these women in this book, listed in this book, and the hundreds of thousands and millions of others throughout the history, the annals of time, who did not love their lives, they went by this formula. By the blood of the Lamb, they overcame. Because it's not by might, it's not by power, but it's by my spirit, says Yahweh Sabaoth in Zechariah chapter 4, verse 6. Because of the word of their witness, the testimony which they held, that Revelation 12:17 talks about, 14:12 talks about. And they did not love their lives even unto death. They didn't live for their life, but they lived their life for the one who gave his life for them. So what does Yahusha tell us? Do not fear. Matthew 10:28. And do not fear those who kill the body, but are unable to kill the being, the soul, but rather fear him, Yahweh, who is able to destroy both the being and the body in Gehenna, in hell. Another witness to this is Luke chapter 12, verse 4-7. But I say to you, my friends, do not be afraid of those who kill the body and after that are unable to do any more. But I shall show you whom you should fear. Fear the one killing possesses the authority to cast into Gehenna. Yea, I say to you, fear him. Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 copper coins, and not one of them is forgotten before Elohim? But even the very hairs on your head have all been numbered. Do not fear, you are worth more than many sparrows. Revelation 6:9-11 says, and when he opened the 5th seal, I saw that under the altar the beings of those having been slain for the word of Elohim and for the witness which they held. Again, I got to drive this home. We got to hold on to the witness, the testimony. You got to hold on to the personal, intimate experience that you had with the King of Kings and the Master of Masters. We should even know maybe even the very date that it happened, or at least the time and season that it happened in, or at least the year. But there should be a time in our life where we know, okay, before this point, I was dead, but now I'm alive. Now I'm dead to sin and alive to Elohim. After that, I became a new creation after that moment. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, how long, O Master, set apart and true, until you judge and avenge our blood upon those who dwell upon the earth? And there was given to each one a white robe, and they were told that they should rest a little while longer, until both the number of their fellow servants and their brothers who would be killed as they were was completed. In this fifth seal, we're about to see this come to pass, the fruition come to pass, I truly believe. Revelation 20, verse 4, and I saw thrones, and they that sat on them, judgment was given to them. And the lives of those who have been beheaded because of the witness, because of the testimony they bore to Yahusha, and because of the word of Elohim, who did not worship the beast, nor his image, who did not receive his mark upon their foreheads or upon their hands. They lived and reigned with Messiah for 1,000 years. But persecution will come. Matthew 10, 16. See, I send you out as sheep amongst wolves. Therefore be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. But be aware of men, for they shall deliver you up to Sanhedrins and flog you in their congregations. You shall be brought before governors and kings for my sake, as a witness to them and to the nations. But when they deliver you up, do not worry about how or what you should speak, for it shall be given to you in that hour what you shall speak. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father speaking in you. And brother shall deliver up brother to death, and father his child, and children shall rise up against their parents, and shall put them to death. And you shall be hated by all for my name's sake. But he who shall have endured till the end shall be saved, which is also second witness in Matthew 24, verse 13. And when they persecute you in this city, flee to another. For truly I say to you that you shall by no means have gone through all the cities of Israel before the Son of Man comes. A top one is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for the top one to become like his teacher and a servant like his master. If they called the master of the house Beelzebub, how much more those of his household? But have no fear. Therefore do not fear them, for whatever is covered shall be revealed, and whatever is hidden shall be made known. What I say to you in the dark, speak in the light, and what you hear in the ear, proclaim on the housetops. Do not fear those who kill the body, but are unable to kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both body and soul in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a copper coin, and not one of them falls to the ground without your Father? Even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. So do not fear, for you are worth more than many sparrows, even everyone rather. Therefore, who shall confess me before men, I shall also confess him before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever shall deny me before men, him I shall also deny before my Father who is in heaven. Do not think that I came to bring peace on the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. Sword. For I have come to bring division, a man against his father, daughter against her mother, daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are those of his own household. He who loves his father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. He who loves his son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. See also Matthew 19:29 and Luke 14:26. And he who does not take up his stake and follow after me is not worthy of me. He who has found his life shall lose it, but he that has lost his life for my sake shall find it. Now here's our comfort. This is what we're fighting for. This is what we're enduring for. This is what we're going to finish this race for. John chapter 14, verse 1 through 6. Let not your heart be troubled. Believe in Elohim, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many staying places. If not, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I shall come again to receive you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. And you know, and I go, you know, the way you know. And Thomas said to him, Master, we do not know where you are going. How are we able to know the way? Yahusha said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. John chapter 15 talks about the hatred of the world. If the world hates you, know that it hated me first before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own. But because you are not of the world, but because I chose you out of the world. For that reason, the world hates you. Remember the word that I said to you, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they shall persecute you too. If they had guarded my word, they would have guarded yours too. But all this they shall do to you because of my name, because they do not know him who sent me. Revelation 2:7 says, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the assemblies. To him who overcomes, I shall give to eat from the tree of life, which is in the midst of the paradise of Elohim. Verse 10, do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. See, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison in order to try you. You shall have pressure or tribulation 10 days. Be trustworthy until death, and I will give you the crown of life. Verse 11, he who has ears to hear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the assemblies. He who overcomes shall by no means be harmed by the second death, mentioned in Revelation 20, verse 6. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the assemblies. To him who overcomes, I shall give him some hidden manna to eat. I shall give him a white stone, and on the stone a new name written, which no one knows except him who receives it. Verse 25, but hold fast what you have until I come. And he who overcomes and guards my works until the end, to him I shall give authority over the nations. And he shall shepherd them with a rod of iron. The potter's vessel shall be broken to pieces, as I also received from my Father. And I shall give him the morning star. He who has ears to hear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the assemblies. He who overcomes shall be dressed in white robes, and I shall by no means blot out his name from the book of life. But I shall confess his name before my Father and before his messengers. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the assemblies. Verse 10, because you have guarded my word of endurance, I also shall guard you from the hour of trial, which shall come upon the earth, all the world, to try, or the New King James says, to test those who dwell on the earth. See, I'm coming speedily, quickly. Hold fast, hold what you have, that no one take your crown. He who overcomes, I shall make him a supporting post, a pillar in the dwelling place of my Elohim. He shall by no means go out. I shall write on him the name of my Elohim and the name of the city of my Elohim, the new Jerusalem, which comes down out of the heaven from my Elohim, and my new name. He who has ears to hear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the assemblies. To him who overcomes, I shall give to sit with me on my throne, and as I also overcame and sat down with my Father on his throne. He who has ears to hear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the assemblies. In closing, Yahusha tells us, these words which I have spoken to you, that in me you might have peace, you might have shalom, you might be complete. In the world you will have tribulation, but take courage. I have overcome the world. And going back to our proof text, Revelation 12:17, the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to fight with the remnant of her seed, those guarding the commands of Elohim, possessing the witness of Yahusha HaMashiach. And Revelation 13:7-10 says this, and it was given to him, the beast, to fight or to make war with the set apart ones and to overcome them. And he was given authority authority was given to him over every tribe, tongue, and nation, and all those dwelling on the earth whose names have not been written in the book of the life of the slain Lamb from the foundation of the world shall worship him. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. He who goes into captivity he who brings into captivity shall go into captivity. He who kills with the sword has to be killed with the sword. Here is the endurance and the belief of the set apart ones. So now we know truly what it means to have the testimony of Yahusha. And one last warning here. The messengers of the three angels. Revelation 14:6-12. And I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, holding the everlasting good news, the everlasting gospel, to announce to those dwelling on the earth, even to every nation, tribe, and tongue and people, saying with a loud voice, fear Elohim and give glory to him, because the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and the earth, the sea, and the fountains of water. And another messenger followed him, saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations drink the wine of the wrath of her harlotry. And a third messenger followed them, saying with a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast in his image and receives the mark upon his forehead or upon his hand, he shall drink the wine of the wrath of Elohim, which is poured out undiluted into the cup of his wrath, and shall be tortured with fire and sulfur before the set apart messengers and before the Lamb. And the smoke of their torture goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night, those who worshiping the beast in his image, and if anyone receives the mark of his name. Here is the endurance of the set apart ones. Here are those guarding the commands of Yahusha, of Elohim, and the belief or the faith or the testimony, witness of Yahusha. In Matthew 28:20, part B, Yahusha tells us this, and lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. And with that, Yahweh will bless you, keep you. Yahweh will make his face shine upon you, lift up his countenance towards you, and give you peace. Shalom.
Good, great teaching, brother. Thank you so much. Yeah, we have to endure to the end, and we keep his commandments, and we're very, very blessed. I was able to get some good insight from your study, and I wanted to just add to what you were saying earlier, because that we see that through, because those who kept the testimony of Yahusha, just like Yahusha prophesied was going to happen. He said that some of you, and he was referring back to the martyr of Jeremiah, that that there will be prophets that will be persecuted, and there will be basically in that generation be killed in his name. And so I liked it. I liked how Andrew's testimony, when he was hung 3 days, just like Yahusha was hung 3 days. I mean, died the same way as he did. I mean, the difference was that he wasn't nailed. He was actually, strung with a string. He was bound.
Mm-hmm.
But so the good thing, so after the third day, he became as the first fruits, just like Yahusha was the first fruit, but they liken onto those who died as he did, the martyrs, the prophets, ended up being the first fruits thereafter him. And so, yeah, it's just wonderful how, and this martyr is just like, we too have the confession of Yahushua HaMashiach, and we too may be a persecutor for our testimony, and that is considered a blessing. So just like he said, be steadfast in the word and doctrine that you have received, just like we're receiving today, right? And then one of the wonderful things that I see here is that Andrew ended up even repeating what Yahusha said. I mean, kind of paraphrasing it, but he said, after he was hung on the tree, he was let go. He said, "For your sake, don't let your servant suffer. For who hangs on a tree for your name's sake, be released to dwell again among men, but receive me." And so it's almost like, you see the same thing with Stephen. It's receive my soul, receive me, and don't let me suffer. And that actually started making me think again about the testimony of Yahusha when he was on the tree and he was going through a great deal of suffering. I mean, Yahusha's death happened quickly, but that's because the Father had much mercy on his son. He didn't want him to hang on the tree. And a lot of people think that he was forsaken, because some people will mistranslate that word forsaken. He was never forsaken by the Father. he was shortly, so he could fulfill there. It was that word also means the Shabbatini, which some people translate it as forsaken, but it really means, why are you why are you not preserving me? Or why are you allowing me to go through this suffering? In fact, the Targum, if you go to the Targum, it reads, "Why have you abandoned me? Why so far from delivering me from my anguish roaring?" You see, so it was a plea of mercy, not to let him suffer through that, just like Andrew. Don't let me suffer anymore. Take me, take my soul, receive it. And so that's what Yahusha was alluding to, not that the Father forsake him. So, I just wanted to just clarify that. But yeah, that was great teaching, brother. And I do
And
appreciate,
Yahusha was
yeah,
also quoting Psalm 22 when he said
cor-
that.
correct,
It
correct,
wasn't that he was
right,
just verbalizing it, but he was quoting Psalm 22.
correct,
But I
correct.
love what, just to kind of add to what you were talking about there. Um, and I'm sorry, I don't remember which Passover teaching it was, or if it was the unleavened bread teaching or what have you, but because I've been listening to a lot of Matthew's previous teachings, but he talked about that Yahusha, when he died, that the wrath of man and the wrath of Elohim
Yes.
intersected at Yahusha, and
Yeah.
he bore the wrath of both Yahweh and man at the same time. And it was like a cosmic explosion, if you will. One thing I wanted to add that I forgot to do in the teaching is persecution. Okay, so persecution is actually a good thing. Persecution means that we're not like the world, that we're different, we're Kodesh, we're set apart, right? And persecution, it actually, when we're persecuted, that's when the cream rises to the top, so to speak. That's when the wannabes and the make-believes, they go away. Because when persecution comes, that's when the rubber meets the road. That's when you make a decision. Do I really believe what I believe? When I said those words, when I said I believed in my heart and I confessed with my mouth that Yahusha was master and believed in my heart that Elohim raised him from the dead, did I really believe? Because that's where the rubber meets the road, and that's why I wanted to bring this teaching forth, or I believe that's why Yahweh wanted to bring this teaching forth, is because, folks, we're heading into the days. I truly believe that we're about to see the fulfillment of this fifth seal, and none of us know if we're going to be spared from it or not, like John was, or if we're going to have to give our life for the one who gave his life for us. And so be it if we are, or so be it if we have to, right? But you can't go into this time frame in which we're in, and the time frame in which we're going in the natural mindset, because you'll never make it in the natural. It's got to be in the supernatural. Because like I said before, and I love that verse so much. First time I heard it, I was like, oh man, so powerful. Not by might, not by power, but by my spirit, says Yahweh Sabaoth. And that's the only way that we're going to be able to endure until the end. That's the only way that when they come and round us up and put a gun to our head and said, hey, take this bee sting or die, I'm going to say, pull the trigger. Don't miss. We got to make that decision now, because in our own flesh, it's frailty. But just like these men, there was a supernatural, there wasn't fear that overcame them, but power and fervence and confidence in their Elohim, because they knew what they were dying for. They knew the man in which they preached, not a man, but you know what I mean, the Son of Man. But we have to go into this with that mindset. And also persecution. See, the enemy thinks that persecution works, but persecution doesn't work. He wants to squash us. And one of the pastors I used to go to church at, one of the few things I got from him that was good is he talked about persecution. It's like the enemy comes and tries to squash a tomato, right? And when you try and squash a tomato, all it does is spread. You can't really squash it. And that's what persecution is. It causes the gospel to actually spread further and go further out. Because when you persecuted the original disciples and the 120 that were in the upper room in the temple on the day of Shavuot, and you began to persecute them, well, guess what? You just caused the gospel to go forth to the ends of the earth, just like Yahusha said. So you caused it to spread because of your persecution. It made believers out of those who saw others be tortured for their lives and persecuted. They're like, I can't believe it. That man actually died for the belief in his Messiah. That woman actually died for the belief in his Messiah. And it doesn't work. And what it does is it brings a boldness into the body, and it brings a purity and a refinement into the body that the body of Messiah needs, because right now there's siftings happening. There has been siftings happening, and it's a sifting, levels of it, until we get to that fine powder we call flour, and we can become something that's usable, right? But we have to be refined in the refiner's fire. And that's what persecution does. Persecution is where the rubber meets the road. Because it's like, oh, hey, you know, you're gonna be fired if you don't take this. Fire me. My Elohim will supply all of my needs according to his riches and glory. You know, that's when it comes. Persecution is a good thing. It's what builds our spiritual muscle, right? I mean, even the book of James talks about it. I'm just going to read this real quick because it's important to understand this. It says, blessed is the man who does endure trial, for when he has been proved, he shall receive the crown of life, which the master has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is enticed, I am enticed by Elohim, or tempted by Elohim, for Elohim is not enticed by evil matters, and he entices no one. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and trapped. Then when the desire is conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is accomplished, brings forth death. Do not go astray, my beloved brothers. Every perfect gift, every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, in whom there is no change or shadow of turning. Having purposed it, he brought us forth by the word of truth for us to be a kind of first fruits, speaking of that, of his creatures. So that is what it's all about. That persecution actually brings forth, oh, my bad, I missed verse 2. That's where I was looking. My brothers, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the proving of your belief, your faith, works endurance. And let the endurance have its perfect work, so that you may be perfect and complete and lacking nothing. I mean, this is what it's all about. The cream rising, the spiritual cream rising to the top. And I don't mean that like, you know, a prideful thing, but what I mean is the purest of the pure, because the bride has to make herself ready for the wedding supper. He's not coming back for a harlot. I've said this before, I'll say it again. He's not coming back for a harlot. You cannot walk into the kingdom and still have footsteps in Mystery Babylon. You cannot gain access to New Jerusalem if you're gaining access to Mystery Babylon. You cannot look back at this world after you've put your hand to the plow. He who puts his hand to the plow and looks back, he's not worthy to become my disciple. That's why he tells us, count the cost. Count the cost. Many of you know, almost it's in 4 days, it'll be 2 years since my daughters were taken from me. But I had to make that decision. Preach the gospel, fulfill your calling that I've called you to do, or keep your daughters. It motivated me. It made me angry with a righteous anger, not a fleshly anger. I got mad at the devil. I said, no. You picked the wrong guy to mess with. You barked up the wrong tree because you didn't stop me. You didn't hinder me. You motivated me. Not only am I going to tell people not to take the mark of the beast, but I'm going to tell everybody that I can tell. I'm going to make 30 to 40 videos, and I don't care how many of them get taken down, how many get censored, how many you shut down, you tear down my whole channel, whatever you do, it doesn't matter. It's not going to stop, because the word of Elohim does not return unto him void, but it accomplishes that which he sent it forth to do. And all you did was give me a bullseye and give me laser focus. And I tell you what, I may have lost my daughters in this kingdom, but I know, because I stand on the promises and the faith of this word right here. And I'm standing before you today because this is how I overcome, by the blood of the Lamb, by the word of my testimony. And I don't care if they kill me, because since I've been 16 years old, I have known that I've known that I've known. I didn't have a vision. I just had an unction inside that, man, I don't know why. I can't tell you why. I can't tell you when, but I feel like I'm going to see the end of days, and I'm going to see Yahusha's return. I'm going to see the tribulation come to pass. And I'm not going to die a natural death, but like John the Baptist, I might be beheaded, because guess what? Like John the Baptist, I don't keep my mouth shut. I tell people the word of Elohim, whether they want to hear it or whether they don't want to hear it, whether it empties a room or whether it fills it. I don't care, because I'm not one who pleases man. I'm here to please an audience of one. There is one person, there's one being who's writing the check at the end of your life for the rewards. He says, I'm coming to judge the quick and the dead, and to reward each man according to his due, based upon his works. That's what he says. We have one master. One master. It's not a pastor. It's not a ministry. It's not our friends. It's not our family. It's not our government. It's not your job. You have one king, and you can't serve two masters, for you will love one and you will hate the other. And you better make the right decision before you need to make the decision. Because I'm telling you with all boldness, I looked right in the dead eyes of policemen who came to my house because I was preaching the gospel online, and somebody called the cops on me, and there were 6 of them that came up. I got it on video. It's on my Facebook. And I told them, one of them said, I'm a Christian. I believe too. I said, I've been a believer since I was 16 years old, and I've known, and I know exactly what's going on. And I told all of them, I said, don't take the shot. It's the mark of the beast. And I stared right directly in their eyes, and I didn't cower in fear, not in my own might, not in my own power, but by his spirit. Why? Because the love of Christ compels me. Because of what he did for me compels me. It doesn't matter what they do. It doesn't matter what career they take away. Hey, Brandon, you can't preach the gospel and be employed here. You represent the company, whether you're inside of work or outside of work. Oh, really? So what you're saying is you don't want me to preach anymore. Well, we're not really saying that. No, what you're saying is that I can't preach online anymore, is what you're saying. Well, you know what? I'm done. Because I'm not going to be owned by anyone except for the one who bought and paid with his precious blood for me. That's who I'm going to be owned by. I'm going to be a slave to righteousness. And I'm here to tell you guys that, man, honestly, I hope they put me in a FEMA camp. Because if they put me in a FEMA camp, I'm telling you, it's going to be lit. Because you're giving me a legit captive audience. Everybody in the room is going to hear the word. Everybody. And I'm going to be preaching and preaching and preaching and preaching and preaching, just like these men were, exhorting and exhorting and exhorting until their last breath is given, or until the walls shake, hallelujah, and an earthquake and an angel shows up and rescues me. Who knows? Who knows? But I'm telling you, we are going to be witnesses to him. We're going to make disciples to the ends of the earth. That's what we're called to do. We're called to preach the gospel. We're called to preach this Melchizedek royal covenant Torah, which I believe is the gospel. That is truly the everlasting gospel. It's truly a salvational message. And it's truly something worth dying for. And I exhort you guys and gals that, man, read through these New Testament, so-called New Testament epistles of the times where Peter and Paul, or Paul and Silas are in prison, and Peter's in prison, and all this stuff, and all these times where they said, nah, I'm gonna obey Yahweh. I'm not gonna obey man. Forget what man can do to me. Throw me in the fire. I don't care. Just like Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, right? Because there'll be what? Another in the fire. Let it be known to you, O king, that I will not bow down to your statue. I will not take your shot. I will not participate in your beast system. Paul says, though they slay me, I'm already dead. How can you kill somebody who's already dead? Because if we're dead, we're dead. We're dead. What is this flesh? This flesh is just a temporary covering. It doesn't even matter. I want to live with him. I want to inherit that kingdom. He says, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. Are you going to store up treasures here on earth where moth and dust and thief can come in and rob and steal you? Or are you going to store up treasures in heaven where no one can touch it? Where no one can touch it. And I'm telling you, what you have to learn, what we have to learn is how to gaze. Because it's not the rah-rah, it's not the motivational teachings and all that stuff that only gets you so far. It's not the prophetic, it's not knowing what's coming, but it's knowing who's seated on the throne. It's knowing how to gaze. John knew how to gaze. That's why Revelation 4 and 5 is there. It's there as a focal point. That as you go through and you see, maybe we've seen loved ones die through all the pharmakia that they're doing out there right now and blaming it on what. And we've seen friends die, and we've seen, our family stripped away from us, but there's one thing that we hold to, and that's the anchor of our soul. We hold fast to him. Because that's what it's all about, to be a witness of Yahusha. That's what it's all about, to be a testimony. That if you're dragged in front of the courtroom and you say, are you a follower of Yahusha? Yeah, I am. Well, why do you believe what you believe? See, 1 Peter 3:15 says that we should be able to give an answer. And I want you guys to be able to give an answer to why you believe what you believe. Because it's not just blind faith. Blind faith isn't enough, but you have to be firmly rooted upon the rock, seated upon the rock of your salvation. Because I'm telling you, and I've said this before, I'll say it again, but all these patriarchs that are in the book of Hebrews in chapter 11, they all died not seeing what they hoped for. But you guys and gals, we're seeing it right now. We're seeing in the last 2 years, we're seeing prophecies fulfilled from 2,500 and 3,000 years ago come to life right in the headlines of the news. And we're seeing it. We're seeing it happen. And the Bible is true. Yah be true and every man a liar. And Yahusha is coming back. He is real. He is resurrected. That tomb is empty. And all will bow down. All will bow down and say, Yahusha HaMashiach is master, to the glory of Yahweh the Father. So anyway.
Good, good. All right, brother. Well, that's all. Huh? Well, we have the great good word, brother. Good word. I'd love to hear the burning the midnight oil sermon. So yeah, so we have a lot of martyrs post Yahusha, and that is, the signature, right? But the first martyr, I mean, if you go back to, the story of our heritage is when Canaan killed Abel because of his righteous works of his sacrifice and the jealousy of Cain. He was a martyr. He truly was a martyr, and the bloods cried from the ground. Zechariah, Jeremiah, there are martyrs for righteousness. So Yahusha, he said this generation has to be fulfilled in the same way because there's going to be so much righteousness that people are going to get killed. And that is what Yahusha was preaching. And he was giving me a heads up, get ready because they're coming after you. So, but it's good. I think their heart had to be prepared for the persecution and to be perseverance in front of the enemy. And like you said, it's about, one person's death just lights the lights up the town with the fearless power of the Ruach HaKodesh and some of these people, prophets. Brother, I'm going to go ahead and stop the video so that way we can
that's fine.
allow. All right. Okay. Blessings to all. Can you stop the video?